This episode is sponsored by Sapphire Partners. Sapphire is the top recruiting firm in Southern California. If you don't already know Sapphire Partners, then I'm happy to make the introduction. In addition to recruiting, compensation, back-channel intelligence, they're also very active investors, having invested in over 70 of their clients. Thank you, Sapphire Partners.
Hello and welcome to the LA Venture Podcast. We're David Waxman and Minnie Ingersoll, partners and investors at TenOneTen.
Today, Matt Kozlov and I are on a Zoom video connection. Matt is the managing director for Techstars Space. And before that, he was three-time managing director for Techstars Health, also here in LA. He had a few jobs before jumping over to Techstars, Yahoo, mobile gaming, enterprise security. Looks like a lot of expertise in corp dev. But we got to start by just acknowledging what's going on today, which is we're in the middle of COVID-19. We're all sheltering in place at home. Matt and I both, I think, have kids who might bust in on us at any time. So it's kind of a anything goes podcast today. Matt, thanks for joining.
Thanks. I'm hiding in my bedroom where hopefully my two small children will not interrupt. And this is the closest thing I have to quiet, sheltered space. But we don't have a desk in this room. So I am, in fact, lying in bed doing this podcast. I must be your first podcast guest who's doing this from their bed. Is that true?
That's entirely true. I was not sure whether to call it out. Actually, we are in the middle of a world health crisis. So I think it's a little bit looser standards here. So, you were the managing director for a health tech accelerator for the past 3 years. Do you have thoughts on what's going on right now in the world?
What I'm seeing on the healthcare front with a lot of my startups, and I'm hesitant to call this an opportunity because I think that could potentially sound callous, but it is highlighting the need for certain technologies in healthcare, things like telehealth, things like digital tools to improve doctor efficiency, tools to speed clinical trials, tools to find drugs more easily and to enforce adherence, to make the health system work more efficiently. Health systems that have made the investment to integrate technologies and focus on innovation to make their operating environments more efficient, everything from patient communications to patient intake to billing to nurse staffing to care pathway optimizations. It's all paying off for them. I don't think anybody was prepared for this, but I think the hospitals and health systems that did start integrating technologies sooner are probably better equipped for this, and startups who are offering tools for those types of applications are in wild demand right now. I'm seeing startups onboarding thousands of doctors a day and be rolled out statewide across an entire health system.
Sometimes it's actually sort of hard for me to sort out who's going to be the winner and how to sort of think about sorting things out in, let's say, telehealth right now.
Yeah, well, I think, starting at the triage level, if I'm sick now, what do I do? Do I try to go to the doctor's office? Do I try to go to an urgent care facility? Do I go to the ER? The answer is, well, first you got to triage that and create some kind of tool that points you in the right direction. And maybe the answer is, you just need antibiotics that a nurse practitioner can actually prescribe to you virtually without even seeing you face to face. I think the irony is a lot of people are not aware that their plans even necessarily cover that and prefer to talk to their primary care physician.
I also struggle to know sometimes whether I'm getting someone who can actually diagnose or prescribe for me or for my children more often versus someone who can kind of just tell me, oh, you've got to go to urgent care, you don't.
Yeah, and that's a part where technology, I think, is going to play an increasing role too in putting some of the sensors and equipment into the home, for remote care touch points, making sure you have a connected digital thermometer, a connected digital scale, connected, blood pressure cuff, glucose monitor for diabetic patients, but trying to create as much of a bridge between the data that you as a doctor would get from your patient in person versus when they're at home.
What do you think, as you know, TenOneTen, we tend to focus on data is a big focus of ours. What do you think about the status of data and being able to share data and actually make use of our health data right now?
I think there's a lot of different ways you could unpack that question. I mean, from a public health epidemiology perspective, right now, data is going to be essential. Contact tracing and figuring out the nodes and how this is traveling and how to get our handle on it is going to be really important. There's probably information about what limits this virus and what accelerates this virus in the data, whether it's humidity or temperature data, whether it's wind or animals. There's probably data around the spread and transmission of this that is out there, just isn't being captured and analyzed in the right way. When it comes to personal health data, I think HIPAA compliance is still the rule of the land, and we're very careful as technologists and health systems to make sure that patients' data stays anonymous.
But I think part of HIPAA is keeping it anonymous, and part of it is actually you're going to have to keep me honest here, but part of it is also that data is meant to be able to be extracted from your health records, and that you're supposed to have some ability to sort of own your data. Maybe that's not entirely part of HIPAA.
No, it's true.
Okay.
P stands for portability, not privacy. In HIPAA. However, it's there for the patient to be able to port it, not for the hospital. If you want to bring your data from one provider to another, that is your right. That said, it is very difficult in today's data architecture to do that, because the data lives in these electronic health records, the EHRs, and the health records are generally built to try and keep the data as locked in as possible. And so there is this tension between what is right for the patient and what is probably right for the hospital systems, and what the EHR companies are doing, just the way they design their products to make it difficult. So there are a lot of workarounds, but I mean, if you look at what Epic has done, they're trying to lobby the government to prevent looser data portability standards. So there is a tension there.
So, I had to ask some about our current situation, but I try to always get some of the basics. So give us a little bit more about Techstars Space. As I understand, there's usually sort of corporate sponsors. Maybe in this case, it's not corporate, because I think there's some U.S. government to your sponsorship. But give us a little bit of the basics of Techstars Space.
Yeah. So when I ran the healthcare program with Cedars-Sinai, that program was with one partner, and it was a very deep integrated partnership between ourselves and Cedars-Sinai. For this program, given the nature of the space industry, there's commercial, there's civil, there's military. What we wanted to do for this program was to bring together a consortium where we would have different viewpoints from each of those three legs of the space industry: commercial, civil, and military, represented in the consortium. So this program is sponsored by the United States Air Force, NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, here in Pasadena, Lockheed Martin, Maxar Technologies. Maxar is a publicly traded commercial satellite company, SAIC, which is a very large government systems integrator, and Israel Aerospace Industries, which is actually the government-owned aerospace prime defense company out of Israel, but they also have a presence here in the United States, North America.
So does that help? Like, if I'm a company and I want to win a government contract and you've got the U.S. Air Force, is that something that you then help people? And just generally, do you have advice for startups? Like, if I want to have a government contract, should I give up all hope, or is there hope for doing that? And how do you advise people on approaching that?
Yeah, great question. So our program is actually the second of three programs that we now run with the U.S. Department of Defense. Our first program was a program that we set up in Boston with the United States Air Force, which is very generally focused on solving problems that the Air Force needs help with. And the original vision behind that program was that there are a lot of amazing technologies being developed for commercial markets in the United States that are foregoing working with the Department of Defense, because the perception is it's going to be a long haul, it's going to be a lot of paperwork. The people who win those contracts are all the government primes who are equipped and know how to work with the government. And so the Air Force and Techstars started this program in Boston to try and break down those walls and to increase the mentorship and to make it easier for startups to work with the Department of Defense, and they actually wound up changing their approach to grants. Now you can apply for a grant with the Air Force, and these are non-dilutive sources of capital where you can apply, you can fill out a relatively simple form and hear within 30 days whether you want a phase one. And if you want a phase one, that basically gives you access into different customers within the military. And if you find one that says, yes, we would be interested in purchasing your product, then you can be eligible for, we have companies who've actually received $1.5 million or more in government grants as part of a phase two. They're called SBIRs. And what we're seeing is that companies are getting that access to mentorship as well as customers and government grant funding with really very little experience having done this before. And what we're seeing is that affirmation and confirmation of interest from the Department of Defense often makes it a lot easier for our companies to raise venture funding, because they see that, hey, there's actually a potentially big, reliable customer.
My understanding of SBIRs is they're sponsored by different government agencies. So like the Air Force might give you an SBIR grant, but then NASA might also give SBIRs. And is that usually a good entry point? Are there other entry points? Is that a good place to start if I'm a startup looking for non-dilutive money or relationship?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic way to start. And each of those SBIRs are administered from different pools of capital, and how they can be deployed changes from department to department. The department that I've seen sort of speed line the process as quickly as possible is the Air Force. And so I would encourage companies to specifically look at the Air Force's SBIR process administered through AFWorks or AFRL, the Air Force Research Lab. That's the one they have something called an open topic, which is show me what you got. They just say, tell us what you have, and we'll tell you if it's interesting to us, as opposed to putting out a very specific request for very specific technology. And so, I would definitely recommend starting with the Air Force open topics and SBIRs. Navy and Army, NASA, the Department of Energy has a SBIR process. I think the FAA has started issuing grants as well. Certainly the NSF also has. Any startup that thinks they might have a technology that could be applicable to the government should be looking at that as a way of bringing in capital. And it usually starts off small, like 50 to 75K, but it can be in the seven figures as you go towards second phases.
And then I think it's related to one of my questions about Techstars Space may also relate to just the U.S. Air Force, is sort of how broadly or how narrowly do you define the companies that you'll take into Techstars Space?
We try and cast a pretty broad net. We definitely invest in companies that are obviously space companies. We had one company in our last cohort that's building propellant depots in space so that satellites can refuel and build longer lasting missions. We had another company that's doing electric propulsion.
So that's like gas stations in space. Is that what you just said? Gas stations
in space. Yeah, that's a company called Orbit Fab. And we had another company that's doing electric propulsion systems, using tiny little thrusters that can be assembled on your satellite to allow small satellites to move nimbly through space for very, very long time. So those are obvious space companies, but we also have companies in our program that are applicable to space as well as many other industries. We had a company in our last cohort that's building a nuclear power source for stable, long-lasting energy. Then we also had companies that are doing aerial imagery analysis from either satellites or drones that can be used for farmers to optimize their crops and irrigation. It can be used for oil and gas companies to detect leaks or problems in their equipment, but it can also be used for surveillance of enemy or other countries' military bases. So a lot of the companies that we like to invest in would be called dual use, where they have a commercial application, but they also might have a mission-based application.
So Techstars decided to launch Techstars Space. It didn't exist before. I think you were doing this in the last year, I guess. Kind of the I'm turning into a VC. Oh my gosh. Why now, Matt?
Yeah. So I don't think 5 years ago we could have run this program. I think that there have been a number of disruptions that have enabled this program to run now and to be as compelling a category for venture capital. The first is access to space has been fundamentally disrupted by companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Rocket Labs. They have made it significantly less expensive to get a satellite into orbit. And what that means is you can, for $2 million or less, you can build a satellite, get it into space, start generating valuable data or connectivity from that satellite. And if you're a startup, space is now a viable option. Whereas 5 years ago, you couldn't get that satellite into orbit for anything near the price per kilogram you are now.
So if I wanted to put, I don't know the terms very well, but like CubeSats is something I'm always hearing about. How much investment, what are the steps there? Who do I contract with to actually get that into space if I wanted to do that?
Yeah, well, assuming you've already built your satellite, you could, and universities now have programs where they're building CubeSats and getting them into orbit.
How big are they actually? I'm like waving my hands around here.
Yeah, the typical measurement is they designate by U's, so like 1 unit, 2 units, 6 units. Usually most CubeSats are between 1 and 6 U. And they're about this is about a 1 U.
It's like a toaster.
Yeah, it's like a toaster. Yeah,
a big toaster.
And then once you start getting into the small sat, those can start looking like small refrigerators, and then when you're looking at the massive satellites, they are the size of buses. But these small sats, and that's another big disruption, which is the miniaturization and standardization. People are starting to standardize around these smaller satellite functions, and you can build really powerful computers that can work. The components are increasingly off the shelf, so we call them COTS, commercial off the shelf equipment, that are not necessarily meant to last for 30 years. It's okay now because you can get access to space. You can put up a satellite that's maybe only meant to last 3 to 5 years, and it'll eventually degrade and you'll launch a new one because it's not that expensive to build and it's not that expensive to get it into orbit. And so a lot of these new constellations that you're seeing from OneWeb and from Amazon and from some of these startups, there's a company, the Techstars company called Kepler. I don't think anyone expects these satellites to last 30 years, but they're launching Starlink, right? So the SpaceX satellites, they're meant to be temporary. They're meant to drive value in the short term. They'll probably last longer. What we've been seeing is that they're lasting longer than most people would expect. But that is a big disruption where you're able to build them faster and cheaper and get them into orbit faster and cheaper too.
I mean, it's so amazing to think I could build, not that I could, but you can build one of these toaster things and send it into space, and then it could be in space. Before I go too far into this conversation, just the basics. I did an episode with Anna Barber about Techstars, and now I've forgotten. But there's something like I know that's great, but I think there's 100K and there's 20K, and Techstars ends up taking common stock. But can you just hit me with the basics of Techstars for 1 second?
Sure. So every company accepted to our program is offered up to $120,000 of financing on day one of the program. So there's no winning Techstars or anything like that. Once you're in, we give you $120,000, and we do everything we can to help you grow your business as rapidly as possible and help you raise additional capital. The $120,000 is split into 2 components. One is that we give founders our program, as well as $20,000 to cover living expenses typically and miscellaneous costs. And for that, we take 6% common stock, as you mentioned. And then we also offer every company a $100,000 convertible note. And the note, the cap on that note by default is $3 million, but we are able to raise that up to $5 million if a company is raised outside capital at a higher valuation up to $5 million. And then the note is optional.
Oh, okay. Do other VCs take common stock?
That is a great question. Not traditional VCs in general. But I wouldn't be surprised if other accelerators did something similar.
I mean, the idea is that VCs take preferred stock, which is kind of like what it sounds like, right? It's you get sort of preferences with your preferred stock. But I guess you're more aligned if you're taking common stock.
We want to be there with the founder. We want to dilute with them over time. We don't take control. We don't take a board seat. We really want to be at the same level as the founder, and for the founder to see us as part of their team, an extension of their team.
And do you think Techstars Space is very different than Techstars Health?
There are a lot of ways to answer that. The one thing, because I had no space experience prior to starting this program.
But did you have health experience?
I also had no health experience.
That's like calling you out on that.
Yeah. Well, okay. Let me answer the first question, and then I'll answer the second. So there are a lot of similarities between healthcare and space. They're hard problems to solve. I think the generally accepted understanding is that healthcare sales cycles tend to be pretty long. The general guidance is that it usually takes 18 months to close a hospital as a contract. And, often these are not, $10, $20 million contracts. They can be, $200,000, $400,000 contracts. So it's not an industry where you're going to have quick wins. And the same is true in space. Founders who are trying to build products in space need to be in it for the long haul. They tend to be, there's even fewer. There are 5,000 hospitals in the United States. There are, if you're selling into hospitals, that's your customer base. That's a finite pool. There's a much, much smaller pool of finite customers in space. If you're thinking about, military customers, aerospace primes, and space agencies, that's a finite number in the world. And so you're looking at big ticket items, smaller volume. But interestingly, another similarity between the two is that they're highly regulated. You can't get them wrong. It's also putting billions of dollars of equipment and decades of time at risk. So when we put up the Mars 2020 rover, you can be very, very assured that every single component on that craft has been tested thoroughly. The design for that has been in the works for a decade. These are very carefully calibrated and designed and tested before they actually get launched. They're, I don't want to say over-engineered, but they're precisely engineered. And so if you're a startup trying to integrate a component or your product into a space mission, you similarly have to make sure things have been, all the I's have been dotted and all the T's have been crossed. So it's a careful industry.
Yeah. Do you feel like you end up coaching, like if you've got a dozen PhDs in your program, do you feel like you end up providing different coaching for those sorts of founders?
Yeah, we had a lot of PhDs in our healthcare program too. And that actually goes back to another similarity where sometimes, and this, I'm going to compare these two programs, the healthcare and the Starburst program with Anna's LA program. I am getting companies that may have been very well funded. I had, that electric propulsion company that I mentioned to you before, 6 PhDs it was being developed over the course of 9 years out of the university. And so maybe didn't necessarily have the experience raising capital, selling, rolling out a commercial product. And so we spend a lot of time in our program surrounding them with mentors and business leaders who have done that, and teaching them how to fundraise and helping them build that muscle. I do think that you can turn not all PhDs, but a lot of PhDs into great entrepreneurs. Some PhDs, again, are too into their own technology and being in the lab and don't want to actually run a company. But there are a lot of amazing PhDs who have built a great technology and can build a great business around it.
Great. So, you alluded to Anna at Techstars LA. I'm kind of curious about Techstars, actually. And so I think there's a lot of differences between the city programs and the, what do you call it, an industry program? What is yours? Vertical?
Yeah, we call them, corporate program and an industry program.
Okay. So there's some differences there. You've been part of Techstars for a long time now.
I've been at Techstars now longer than I've been at any company. which I don't know if that's a good thing or says much for me. I don't know what it says. It says a lot about Techstars, though, and my commitment and passion for the organization. I've been an employee, a managing director with Techstars for 4.5 years, and before that, I was a mentor. Cody Sims, who ran the Techstars Disney program, had actually been one of my bosses at Yahoo. I do think it's an incredible mission. I mean, we've invested now in over 2,000 startups since we started, I guess, about 15 years ago. Each program has about 150 mentors, times 50. That's a lot of really amazing people that we can plug our startups into. And we have over 80 corporate partners, including, governments and, Fortune 500 corporations across the globe. I think it's an amazing network to be a part of.
Okay, but let me ask a different one. So I'm coming from San Francisco, where I've been, or the Bay, or the Silicon Valley for 2 decades now, and there isn't much Techstars in the Bay Area, I think, unless I'm wrong.
We don't have a program there, but we have a lot of companies there. We have a lot of mentors there, and a lot of our corporate partners are there. Historically, we've always tried to go into communities where there was a vibrant tech community, but it hadn't necessarily been, synthesized into an organization yet. And I remember, that we now run 3 programs in LA, and I think there's probably room for more.
How much? But so Techstars HQ, if that's a real word, is in Boulder, I believe.
Correct.
How much latitude do you get as the managing director?
Quite a lot. I mean, there's certain things that can't change or won't change. We'll always be a 13-week program. We'll always invest 120K. We generally will always have, our mentor madness experience, where we bring in our mentors in the first month. Second month tends to be focused on execution and building the business, and third month is focused on fundraising. There's certain, requirements around our logo, but we do have a lot of latitude around how we run the program. We select our own companies. How we interact with those companies is up to us.
So where do you think you really are leaving your mark on Techstars or on LA as an ecosystem, or where do you want to be leaving your mark over the next decade?
I should probably be thinking about that question more than I do.
You also have small children at home, and we are all quarantined at home. So you're given some latitude, but I am kind of curious about like what motivates you and where you want to be going.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, this goes back to, what I said about, helping really passionate founders who are really passionate about the problem they're trying to solve, and helping them do it. To me, that's what I love more than anything. I love being helpful. I love helping founders with big dreams who are solving big problems. And if they can build a great business that all makes us a little money at the end of the day, that would be nice. But I don't think I think about much more than that.
Cool. And where did you grow up? And what were you like in high school?
I grew up in suburban New York, in a suburb called Scarsdale, which is part of Westchester County, about 30 minutes outside of Manhattan. What was I like in high school? I mean, I was definitely a nerd. I was a very good student. I got very good grades. I worked hard. Probably worked harder in high school than college. But I was also a musician. I played saxophone, still do, although not as often given the 2 small kids. I had a great group of 6 friends, and those are the main people I saw day to day.
That's great. And how do friends describe you? How would your friends today describe you?
My friends today would probably describe me as pretty cheerful, outgoing, extroverted, fun-loving, family guy. That's
totally. I like that. It rings true. That's great. Okay. I have no more personal questions for you. This was great. It was really interesting to learn more about both tech, health, and you.
Well, I had fun. When will this air?
I have no idea.